Saving on your education should be a right, not a competition. At University of Phoenix, our bachelor's and master's scholarships are accessible to all. You'll get the best scholarship or savings you qualify for. Simple as that. Because everyone deserves an opportunity to save on their education without competing for it. Explore scholarship options at University of Phoenix.
Welcome to the first day of our third annual Inclusive Leadership Summit, Transparency as the Catalyst for Belonging. We're so excited that you all are joining us here, so excited and ready to get us started. My name is Saray Lopez, and I serve as the Director in the Office of Educational Equity here at University of Phoenix. So let's get started by defining a few key terms that will be central to our discussion over the next few days. Transparency in the context of our workplaces, schools, and communities. Transparency is about an open and honest conversation. It's not about sharing information, but also providing the reasons behind it. This is openness is crucial in building trust and fostering a sense of belonging. And what is belonging? Belonging occurs when individuals feel accepted, understood, and valued for who they are. They feel seen. It's about being a vital part of the team, feeling comfortable to express your thoughts and being your true self without fear of repercussions. Our goal during the Inclusive Leadership Summit is to embed these concepts deeply into your mindset and actions, driving more equitable behaviors in your communities. During this summit, you'll have numerous opportunities to connect with others and delve into areas such as leadership and management, healthcare and behavioral science, education, and you'll also be able to apply your learning in practical sessions throughout the career fair, throughout the workplace leadership diversity seminars, throughout the various areas, networking opportunities throughout this platform. So welcome, thank you, and let's get started. Next slide. We recognize that this event is being broadcasted not just across the country, but worldwide. And we honor and express our gratitude to the Indigenous peoples who were the stewardess of the lands we now occupy. While a land acknowledgement is just a beginning, it's an important step in our collective journeys towards racial equity. So here in the Phoenix metropolitan area, we are on the traditional lands of the Hohokam, Akimet-O'odham, Pipash, and Yavapai people's lands. Thank you for taking this moment to honor the original custodians of these lands. Next slide. Let's set the stage for today's discussion and throughout the next few days. These are a few guidelines that we believe are essential here at University of Phoenix within this Inclusive Leadership Summit space to foster respectful conversations. This is a space where we learn, where it may be uncomfortable in some cases, maybe the topics may be uncomfortable, but this is a space where we create that safety to stretch our opportunities to learn. So please be respectful of one another. If there's opinions that you may not agree with, receive them, welcome. Now, if there's anything triggering, please do what is necessary for yourself, remove yourself from the conversation, and please take care of yourself. That is absolute priority. So thank you. We encourage you to share your experiences and perspective in the chat box and ask that everyone contribute to an atmosphere of mutual respect and sensitivity. So before we dive into all the sessions throughout the summit and today's keynote sessions, We'll hear from the president of the University of Phoenix, Mr. Chris Lynn. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Saray, and good morning, everyone. Can I just get a confirmation?
We can hear
you.
you.
Guys hear me?
Correct, yes.
Okay, great, thanks. Sorry, a little technical difficulty. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Saray. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the 3rd Annual Inclusive Leadership Summit. I'm both honored and excited to open this important event. Over the next 3 days, we hope to advance our ability as leaders to build cultures of belonging, empathy, and inclusivity within our organizations and communities. The University of Phoenix serves a highly diverse student body comprised primarily of working adults whose average age is 38 years old. 60% of our students are ethnic minorities, 70% are women, and 60% are first-generation college students. Our ability to build a culture of belonging for all of our students, faculty, and staff is essential to their and our success. And so the topics covered in this summit will help tremendously with these efforts. We're extremely proud of the work we've done under the university's President Advisory Council for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging, where we strive for all of our students and staff to feel a sense of belonging across the university. Our teams continue to build innovative solutions inside and outside the classroom, which notably included the launch of this Inclusive Leadership Summit in 2022. The work of our leaders in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging has been recognized by outside organizations, like recently the Leadership Diversity and Inclusivity Excellence Award that was granted by UPCEA. And for those of you who are not familiar, UPCEA is an organization dedicated to advancing the field of professional, continuing, and online education, and they're a leader in our industry. We understand and value the unique challenges and perspectives of our students, faculty, and staff, and what those perspectives bring to our community. And we are committed to creating an environment where every individual feels valued, respected, and empowered to succeed. This summit is a testament to that commitment. In today's rapidly changing world, building a culture of belonging is not just a moral imperative, but it's a strategic necessity. An organization whose culture ensures every voice is heard and every voice and story is acknowledged can drive innovation, can enhance collaboration, and drive engagement. All of these things are needed for greater overall success. This is really our responsibility as leaders. Over the next 3 days, we will delve deep into the pivotal role of transparency as the catalyst for building a culture of belonging. Transparency, as Saray said, is the bedrock of trust and openness. These are crucial elements in breaking down barriers and creating environments where everyone can thrive. Our lineup of thought leaders and change makers will share invaluable insights and practical strategies on how to cultivate such a culture within your organizations and communities. And hopefully, through engaging discussions, interactive workshops, some inspiring keynote presentations, we will equip you with actionable strategies and best practices that will empower you to lead authentically and openly. Our goal at this summit is to cultivate an atmosphere of collaboration and innovation that harnesses diverse talents and perspectives from all of us. I encourage all of you to fully engage, ask questions, share your experiences, and be open to new ideas. The summit is not just about listening, but it's about actively participating in shaping the future of inclusive leadership. So thank you for being here and your commitment to driving thought leadership and inclusivity. Together, we can build a community where everyone feels they belong, where empathy guides our actions, and where transparency paves the way for a brighter, more inclusive future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, President Lynn. Thank you, Chris, for joining us and for these inspiring words and your support for the Inclusive Leadership Summit and commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. And this often occurs within institutions. It starts with leadership. And really, it's been an absolute honor and opportunity for us to be able to get that support and continue to provide and develop these types of events and incredible outreach to continue to discuss these inclusive leadership and belonging. So thank you, Chris.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
So now let's talk about the different opportunities that are available throughout the Leadership Summit. Of course, there's incredible opportunities for networking, connecting with one another. And also, we're really excited that we are able to continue our sharing and creating digital badges that are available for everyone to earn. And so we'll have the Transparency and Practice badge. And I believe this is the 3 days, attending 3 days and 3 sessions. And at the end of the summit, completing the survey feedback with some of the questions there as far as what you learned and how you plan to implement your learning within your own spheres of influence. So we're really excited to continue to bring these different types of learning skills opportunities that you can share within your own networks. And the second badge, which is absolutely incredible and exciting, is fostering authentic connections through vulnerability. And with that, who will be covering is Erica Stroman. So it is my pleasure to introduce Erica Stroman. She is going to take us through this next portion, and she's the Senior Engagement Specialist, Talent Developer at the University of Phoenix. But not only that, she leads the sessions for Workplace Diversity Leader Seminar. That is in the afternoon. You cannot miss those sessions. They're phenomenal. The engagement, they're so inspiring. So with that said, please, Erica, welcome.
Absolutely. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm seeing the chat blow up across all of the states. So I'm just going to say it both. Good morning, good afternoon. And again, welcome to the 3rd annual Inclusive Leadership Summit here at the University of Phoenix. As noted, I'm Erica Stroman, and I am delighted to be the creator and facilitator of our second Workplace Diversity Seminar happening later today. Throw something in the chat if you had an opportunity to attend last year. It was amazing. Last year, over 1,100 participants joined us on our 3-day journey, and that exceeded all of our expectations. So this year, we're back with a new badge for those that are ready to demonstrate their commitment to the work we're doing here today. That's coming up later. That's not what we're doing right now. Right now, we are beginning our journey towards creating a more inclusive and diverse workplace, and it's a mission that I'm deeply passionate about. I'm thrilled to welcome our keynote speakers, Dr. White and also Jennifer Brown, to the stage. Thank you for being here. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erica, for that warm welcome. And thank you to all of those who had any part in bringing this great event to the larger community so that we can learn with and from each other. I am super excited to be sharing this space and time with my friend, Jennifer Brown. And we have a lot to cover this morning. And so we really are looking forward to being in community with each of you. Again, I am Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her. And I want to say happy Pride Month to everyone out there. I am the founder and lead principal consultant of NWC, which stands under my brand name, Nika White Consulting. And we intersect the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging with leadership in business, working with all types of clients in different industries and different sizes. My overall praxis and scholarship is in industrial psychology, organizational development. So I'm showing up today looking to bring that lens to this really important conversation. And I would love for you to also hear from my guest today, who is actually sharing this space with me as we are keynoting this as a fireside chat. But Jennifer, I would love for you to greet this audience in your own way.
Oh, thank you so much. And hello, everybody. Nika, it's just such a pleasure to do this with you. You and I have been in the space for a very long time together and teaching a lot and wrestling with how to communicate some of these really key competencies to instigate growth, to help the leaders that we serve evolve, to evolve the organizations that we all work in, and I would say work in and love, but sometimes find very frustrating from a belonging perspective. So Nika and I, we really hope everybody to give you some insights, some ways to think about this topic of transparency, which, as we really thought about it, really has so many aspects to it. that really connect to inclusivity and belonging in the workplace, for us personally, and also for our organizations. And you'll hear us go back and forth because we are consultants, Nika and I. You'll hear us go back and forth thinking about the system, the organization, how change occurs in these complex systems. And then we'll also talk about the individual in that system and how they can be a change maker, how they can be a catalyst for evolution, and how we can evolve ourselves. Because transparency actually does come also back to our own diversity stories, our identities, our courage to be transparent so that things can shift around us. And absolutely, what a wonderful theme for Pride Month.
It is very much so. I'll just tag on to that, Jennifer, as we engage really in this rich conversation. One of the things that you and I talked about, it kind of naturally found its way as we were planning for today's keynote, but a lot of the points that I was bringing to the conversation that I really had a lot of energy around was more about the intersection of transparency from an organizational perspective. And what I thought was really great is, as you were sharing what was coming up for you, a lot of those thoughts were very much about the intersection of transparency from an identity perspective. And we both concluded, how great is this that we're going to be able to balance this really broad conversation in a way that we think is going to help us kind of streamline the many different ways in which transparency is critically important to this broad body of work of DEIB. So why don't we jump right in, and let's just start with maybe giving our own definitions of transparency. And I invite you to start.
Oh, well, thank you. Wow. Well, as somebody in the LGBTQ plus community, transparency I can liken to my own journey towards authenticity, radical authenticity of literally coming out and being out, and not always, wanting to do that, sensing there would be penalties to doing that, that I would be diminished in some people's eyes. And in the 25 years or more since I came out, and all those years that I spent in the closet, I just struggled with it. I think so many communities that are marginalized and underrepresented, for us to be transparent carries risks. And in those days, it carried a whole lot of risks, no protections, et cetera. And these days it's, sometimes it feels like it's, even more scary in some ways, but I know we've made amazing progress too. So I think that the journey towards transparency is one of being more and more out about a host of things. It's just, you could be out about your experience as a Black woman, Nika. We can be out about our, socioeconomic background, our diverse abilities, and the disclosure of those. We all, as my friend Ash Beckham says, we all have a closet. And to me, the question, though, is not just us and what we're willing to be brave about, but if we leap, will the net appear? And to me, an organization that supports people to be transparent is ready to receive that information and hold it, respect it, do something with it, importantly, and have a transparent relationship with the humans in the organization to say, you matter, all of you is welcome here. And if you need support, importantly, when we speak about things like mental health and others, if you need support, this is the kind of organization that is committed to building that resource and making sure that it is destigmatized so that we can all talk about it, utilize it, and get healthier. And to me, that is a relationship of transparency. It is a relationship of accountability that I want to see between leadership, companies, and the organization and the individual humans that we ask so much of.
Yes,
How about you, Nika, though?
That is so beautifully stated, and it really just amplifies the importance of how transparency can be a fuel for allowing us to lean into this human-centric approach as we are building and cultivating those relationships. When I think about transparency, all the things that you just mentioned from an identity perspective certainly comes to mind, and I won't talk about that because I feel like you covered it quite well. What I would like to share, though, is transparency from a standpoint at the organizational level, because while it starts at the personal level, right, we need people to feel safe and comfortable to be able to show up as their authentic selves within any type of environment that they may find themselves in. But I think when we consider leadership and we consider people that have great level of power and influence within organizations, we have to make sure that those individuals are feeling a sense of accountability and responsibility for being very open about sharing information, and not just the information itself, but also about the decision-making process that also has a lot to do with the information that's being shared, right? What is the why behind it? What are those challenges, and what's the progress maybe related to diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, justice, right? All the things with all stakeholders. And I think that that concept really involves several different key elements when you think about a healthy work culture. That is open communication, it is accountability, it's also inclusive decision-making. And notice that I didn't say consensus decision-making, but inclusive decision-making. There is a key difference there. It's about also the visibility of our efforts. Sometimes we think that if we fly below the radar, people know all of our intentions and our efforts. And I think that level of transparency, it helps people to not question it because we have evidence of it, right? We can visibly see how someone is really supporting us in a way that allows us to be set up for success. And then I also think about how we are aligning ourselves with the need to create that level of trust through our integrity, right? So I think all of those things are what comes to mind for me when I hear transparency and how it intersects with this broad body of work of DEI.
That's beautiful, Nika. I love the word integrity. That is just so important. And what I find fascinating, and Nika, we're sort of a generation that is watching the expectations for transparency to really change. And I love that, right? Because I think it's not that my generation didn't want that. But we didn't have the fortitude to demand it. We didn't have the sheer numbers. And yet we all deserved it. We deserved an organization to work in organizations that prioritized fairness, equity, transparency, all those, integrity. But really what we're seeing now is this demand and this expectation coming from younger generations. And I'm so excited to be speaking to all of you because the younger generations probably are more represented in this audience than sometimes they are for a lot of the talks that I give to leaders, to say, pay attention. There's so much information bubbling up about what the workplace needs to look like in the future, the work that we have ahead of us as the architects of that future, because when you are in a leadership position, you have your hands on the levers of change to a degree that like nobody else in the organization does. Like with one kind of action, you can create a huge change that might take years for someone else to do. But the transparency is hard, I think, because we're going to talk about what gets in the way of transparency. There are generational norms that we get stuck in, both personally as leaders, like, oh, I can't talk about that. I can't share that. That's not appropriate. And then there's orgs that don't want to change. And they haven't been transparent in the past because that hasn't been the way business has been. So I wondered if you could, add to the barriers to it, because I think you and I, that's where we teach a lot.
Yeah, I think this is a great segue. And to your point, the change-making process requires a great deal of transparency. And I know that we talk often about how you can't do this work of DEI effectively without really trying to lead people through this change management process that allows us all to be able to be well informed about what's happening, why it's happening, and to have voice around how we're feeling and processing, the changes that are taking place. And I love that you brought generational, transparency to the conversation, because we are seeing that there's a difference in how generations are showing up to this broad conversation of DEI. And I don't know about you, Jennifer, but I love to see it, especially from like the Gen Z, and the millennials. They are very vocal about, what they are satisfied with and what they're not satisfied with. And I think that also requires organizations to be much more thoughtful about their level of accountability to transparency. But getting to your question of how do we navigate some of the barriers to transparency? And when I think about that, I often go back to the words of Brene Brown when she says that clarity is kind. I think that the lack of clarity is what leads to resistance. And resistance can show forth in so many different ways, prohibiting people to be transparent about what are the barriers that may not allow them to fully engage in this body of work and see the totality of the value of DEIB. And that becomes, to me, Jennifer, so critical right now when we are finding ourselves really in the midst of an attack on what we are deeply concerned about and deeply love and appreciate, which is, again, this whole work of DEI. And so the anti-DEI movement is here right now. And let me just say this too, it's always been here, but it's really loud right now. And so it's causing us to perceive that maybe it's amplified more than it is. We just have to get louder. So when I think about how do we address some of the resistance, that is a lack of clarity. I think the importance of that is it allows us to be better informed about addressing those challenges head on. And that requires us to understand the source of resistance. And tying this to transparency, there are a lot of people who are not willing, for whatever reason, to be transparent about why they devalue DEI or why they're confused about it and don't want to see it as something that gains a lot of traction. It could be lack of awareness. It could be the lack of time. We find ourselves particularly in this burnt out culture where we're having to prioritize how we're spending the hours that we have in one day, right? And so sometimes that causes us to go immediately to the things that we are seeing results for immediately. And we know that this body of work is a process and it takes time. There's also defending, that's one of the resistors as well. Some people feel like their status is threatened by the work of DEIB. And while they may not be willing to admit it, we know that's one of the resistors. And so we have to think, how do we address that? We do that by helping employees to really shift out of this notion of zero-sum mindset, right? This is not just for a certain subset of people. And the other thing is denying. You probably have heard this too as one of the reasons, Jennifer. I believe that, everyone is inclusive in my organization. We all have opportunity. And when you were to really just dig deep and understand the demographics of that individual, maybe their experiences, that has a lot to do with the narrative that they're telling, right? But when we disaggregate that, and we look at it across certain marginalized professionals within an organization, their story is vastly different. So denying sometimes is not allowing full transparency to come forth. And I think that's a connection point. And then the last thing that I'll say would be fear and discomfort. Fear and discomfort is probably the number one, at least what I have seen of late, as the resistance factor. We are in this space where the council culture is live and it's causing people to sit on the sidelines because they don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to be called out or even called in, right? And so we have to also have a real conversation about being transparent in a way to where if it is fear and discomfort, we can name that, because if we can name it, then we can solve for it. What are you seeing and what are you thinking are some of the big reasons that transparency is, maybe a part of this larger discussion of the anti-DEI movement right now? And how can we combat that?
Yeah, the fear is huge, Nika. Honestly, it's like the biggest barrier to learning. To be transparent, I say to leaders it could look like, I don't know the answer and I'm learning, and here's what I've learned. Here's what I don't yet understand. Here's what I want to know more about. Here's what I'm committed to learning about. That's transparency, because the problem is leaders have been told in the command and control history of the workplace to have all the answers, to show up perfectly, right? To be unassailable, to know where we're going. And, we're in a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous, VUCA.
Yes.
And leaders right now, Nika, I don't know about you, but leaders are completely lost, like really confused, really overwhelmed. Nothing makes sense anymore because it's not just DEIB. It's just all the level of change, the pace of it. It's just a lot to metabolize. And I find leaders are struggling with the skills and the frameworks that have worked for them in the past don't work anymore, and what they've understood to be appropriate and necessary to generate followership is no longer effective. So I would like to hear and see transparency around what are the challenges that you're facing right now as a leader in understanding this moment. And by the way, some of those challenges may be biases. I mean,
Yes.
some of those challenges may be privilege that you carry that has meant that you haven't experienced what so many others have. I would like to hear transparency around that. And I try to role model that and say, look, I'm a combo platter of identities. And some identities allow me to be in the room. Some don't allow me to be in the room. Some make me feel like I should hide parts of who I am. Some have made my life easier and safer. And all of them make up who I am. None of them are bad. They're all just who I am.
Yeah.
But the sort of transparent storytelling that's honest and real, leaders think they have to be perfect out of the gate, and there's actually no such thing. Transparency doesn't mean perfection, and it does not mean that what you're communicating when you're transparent is wrapped up in a nice bow, is all figured out, is finished and polished. We cannot make perfect the enemy of the good at this moment.
Yes.
And in a VUCA environment, literally the more real you show up, the more sort of people can say, this person is a human, they are trying to evolve, and they're being transparent about their work to evolve. And they're like, to your point, they're also transparent about what they didn't understand, what they did wrong, maybe things that they used to say that they are like, wow, I really have rethought that. And I want to share with you what I rethought and why and what I'm doing instead. Transparency, beautiful. You know what I mean? And just, it just build trust, but there is such a fear because of a lot of the generational norms and also identities that have felt over the last couple of years like they don't matter in the work. And I'm really regretful of that, that this work was ever taught in a way that communicated a message to people that you don't matter and who you are is not useful, because it's always useful. It's always useful. I don't care who you are. And I look at a person and I say, there's something I can't see about that person that is not transparent, that hasn't been made transparent to me, but that is absolutely a fact. Diversity is a fact. We all have a diversity story. And my job is to create enough psychological safety and enough of a container so that I can know what that thing is, and so that I can encourage that person to bring their full selves, because I do know how important that is for leaders. But anyway, I that's what I wish I heard, and how transparency would be practiced as a skill, because you know, but it's transparency about what and how do you present it. And we cannot be so polished about it, because it's impossible, because we are living in a very, very fast changing world, and none of us is an expert on what's happening right now.
Absolutely, none of us. One of the things that I want to just interject here is that I want this audience to be aware of, to accept and expect non-closure from this conversation this morning, because as you can tell, Jennifer and I are identifying several different factors that certainly should find its way into the consideration set, but there are a ton of other strategies that I know should be brought to such a conversation. So expect and accept non-closure around how transparency should fully be developed. And because you mentioned it, we have to upskill ourselves around it. I don't know of many leaders that are undergoing, different development opportunities where they're building up their level of transparency and vulnerability, but that is really, really key. And I think that the more that we see leaders lean into that level of vulnerability and transparency, the more that is going to give the others a permission to do the same. As you said, it's not about having all the answers and being perfect. In fact, one of the things I've been encouraging so many leaders to do during this volatile time in this space is to be very open about the tension points. The tension points are real. When we talked a moment ago about how fear and discomfort is really a part of the resistance, we have to realize that those tension points exist, and they are 100% real to the individuals who are sitting in those seats. And so if we think about the frustration of the pace of change, I hear often in some organizations, the tension point would be, we aren't moving fast enough, right? We aren't being aggressive enough to really let this be integrated into all areas of operations, then we also hear of others that are saying we have to slow down because there's some people who aren't quite comfortable. They don't quite get it. Let's continue to educate for a while. Both of those tension points are valid, and finding the balance to be able to help people navigate that is really important. This is what it sounds like on opposite ends of the spectrum. Why are things changing so fast? I feel threatened that I won't be wanted in this new world. On the other end, what it sounds like is, why is change taking so long? Powers that be are so entrenched. And that's a real conversation that's happening right now. And so how can we be transparent even about the tension points that we're navigating as a way to help bring people along?
Right. I mean, transparently framing that, just like you just did. You know, I don't, we so often think we need to have the answer, but really it's asking the right questions, reframing things for people. We are leaders are translators of a lot of complex sort of counter forces and multiple, I don't want to say multiple truths, but perception is reality, and framing some of that. I mean, Nika, just even like trying to capture what might be being felt and experienced by different constituencies enables each of those constituencies to be heard. And it doesn't mean that you have to have the solve. These are impossible things to solve. But even just holding the forum for the discussion, even, you know, thinking creatively, and I'm sure everybody listening to this has been grappling with so many geopolitical issues and conflicts, and just saying, you know, how do we give enough airtime to the strong opinions and the experiences and the lived experiences and the identities of people in our organizations. But that is the job, and it's messy, but there is an art to this. And this is where DEIB kind of comes in, I think, Nika, and really helps organizations understand themselves, to make space, to create a container, you know, to acknowledge multiple perspectives, you know, to enable the truth, and also to join that with, I think, the very important thing, which is many organizations Nika and I get to work with have a commitment to inclusivity, you know, so there has to be a refereeing of all of this transparency. And there has to be kind of a North Star that the organization is following, to say, we know the world is changing. We know that our workforce is changing. We know the demographics. We know if you have customers or students or whoever your stakeholder is, the business case, as we talk about it, simply connects to what the future workforce needs to look like in your organization, and what that future user, customer, client is going to expect, and what they're going to look like. So being too kind of transparent about the facts of demographic change. I mean, those are facts, right? That, thank goodness, that is clear. Sometimes I feel like all of this is so, I try to like land on something that is knowable and factual, and demographic change is a fact.
Yes, you can't argue with data like that, right?
You cannot. And, you know, and the buying power. So decision making is changing, and changing hands, you know, changing hands into women's hands, changing hands into people of color, the queer community. I think, I don't know, last statistic I read, it's like $1 trillion of buying power. I mean, so people are waking up, and there's an accountability for transparency. Speaking of transparency, between the employee and the company, or the customer, or the constituent, or the stakeholder and the organization. And there's an expectation there of, hey, if I'm going to give you my business, I want to know that you are on your path, that you are doing your work. I want to, even if it's not, it doesn't need to be perfect, and it's never done, but it's the commitment that I want to see. It's the progress that I want to see. And more, everybody, I know you know this, but business decisions are being made by large institutions on all of their service providers. Every ecosystem has multiple players, and they're all kind of holding each other accountable in this really interesting way for being better, for improving, for making sure that they're on top of the demographic changes. And so when we have dissenting voices that say, this is making me uncomfortable, we have to weigh that with the future changes that are factually happening, and weighing that with the business strategies that if we ignore all those changes, we are not going to have a business. We will not have a business. We will not have customers. We will not have talent to hire. That talent will not want to stay because they will be uncomfortable. So it's this really interesting moment of acknowledging all the diversity of thought and political opinion, et cetera, but also keeping an eye on if we do not change and evolve to match this, we will die. And that's true for leaders too. If you do not evolve, what got you here will not get you there. You have to lead differently. There's just no choice that we have, but we think we have choices and we love to argue about it. But in the end, I don't know if that will be a successful strategy.
So much goodness there in what you just shared. Yeah, data is king. Data definitely is a way of helping to bring facts to a conversation. And as I mentioned before, it's hard to argue with data. When I think about data and how organizations are leveraging data or should be leveraging data, you and I both have done a lot of work with helping organizations to assess the climate, right? And people's perceptions about, diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging and the work culture. And one of the things that I often encourage leaders to do at the start of these assessment processes is to get into the mindset that you're going to believe the data, right? The data is the data. So believe the data. See, all data is opportunity, not as right, wrong, good, or bad, but as opportunity. And the reason I think that's so important to this conversation of transparency is because the tendency is, if you don't believe the data because you're operating just from your lens of lived experience and not from the lens of the lived experience from those who maybe look different from you, you may have a hard time really buying in that really is truly someone's experience. And if it lands on you as being negative, then sometimes our tendency is, well, we don't want to share that out. And I bring this up because I think that part of also transparency and accountability for organizations is being willing to close that feedback loop. Let's see all the data as opportunity. And even if it's not necessarily where you want to land as your North Star, you do assessments for the benefit of being able to get data to improve. So don't be afraid of it. And be very forthcoming about the issues that have been raised. And I think sometimes there is reticence for people to do that. Are you finding that when you work with clients often?
I am. And Nika, I wonder if we could show a slide and do a little poll for our audience. Speaking of data, I've been collecting, as you have, you and I speak constantly, and we get lots of things shared with us in chat. And team, if we could build this slide, we teach this iceberg model, and there are so many identities and lived experiences, acquired and inherent diversities that our workforce in any institution is suppressing today. Yeah. That is just the truth. And I know as an LGBTQ person who wrestled with all of this, that my waterline of an iceberg, right, which is 10% is above, 90% is below, it would vacillate depending on how safe I was feeling, whether I saw role models around me, whether I saw senior people that shared my identity and were out about it. The same goes for looking for female role models. I know that it hurts workplaces and the people in them to continue to put invaluable energy to suppress identity. And it means that we have organizations that don't transparently understand what's actually getting in the way of productivity and retention and engagement. When we are hiding through fear of someone discovering who we are or bringing our full selves to work is so much harder for some of us than others. We have unhealthy organizations. There's no oxygen, there's no flow in those organizations. And so I can tell you all that I've collected so much data on a lot of these identities, and there may be some that are missing. So please feel free to, chat in if I've missed anything here. But I would love to poll you all actually on what is the identity that I'm going to give you a shorter list than this, but what is the identity that of this shorter list that you spent the most energy downplaying, minimizing, fear of being transparent about that identity? historically for you in your career? And as you answer this, Mika, I want to know for you, like transparency wise, like have you built your transparency to this point as a professional where you can remember a time when you would have answered this poll in a certain way, and now you're sort of comfortably transparent, and you leave the work to others that might be uncomfortable around you?
Absolutely. I mean, 100%. I think that we grow and we evolve. And I'll tell you what has helped me, even as a practitioner in this space, to show up more authentic is when we find that others are open about their stories. You mentioned storytelling earlier. And I think that's such an incredible way of allowing people to feel like you're not on that journey by yourself, right? Let's think about mental health, for instance. There was a time we didn't talk about that, right? I included, I didn't talk about my mental health issues. I'm very open about them now. I'm very open about the fact that talk therapy is really important, that I have to do things to regulate myself so that I am showing up as best as I can when I know that my mental strength is not optimized in those moments. And so I think that it just breaks down those silos. It breaks down the stigma, and it helps people to understand that, you're not alone. And so I love the fact that we're giving this audience a chance to lean into maybe some of the ways in which they have felt, maybe not quite as comfortable sharing some identity issues about themselves. Yeah.
I know Nika, it's always so powerful. And I'm just looking at this and wondered if you had any reactions, but we've got really high numbers for religion, spirituality, mental health, as you mentioned, and also age. I get age a lot. We sometimes say ageism is the last acceptable ism. Somehow, like we still put up with being stereotyped and put into generational assumptions when there's diversity within every diversity. There's all kinds of levels. There's intersectionality going on. So
right.
I wonder, did you have any responses or reactions to these numbers?
As I'm looking at the results there, I'm not incredibly surprised. And in fact, seeing the numbers for religion, spirituality, with all that's happening in the world, I'm not surprised that has surfaced as, such a high percentage of people who are grappling with, how transparent to be around, that particular topic. I think that we all, based upon what environments we find ourselves in, there's always this tendency to cover, to mask, right? And I think there's something to be said for how transparency allows us to break out of that mold, because when we are covering and masking, we are not showing up at our best, which means we aren't able to really gain the value of what true diversity allows us to, which is, not everybody thinking alike, not the group think, but everyone really showing up as their authentic selves and not just conforming to mainstream way of thinking and behaving. And that's what everybody longs for. That is where this whole phenomenon of the belonging conversation has, entered into this broad discussion of DEI. And Jennifer, I always say that it is hard for any person, regardless of their background, their demographics, it is hard for any person to show up at their best in any environment if they're always having to question whether or not they belong. Do I belong here? Am I seen? Am I valued? Am I heard? Do I have full opportunity for success? Can I share this about myself and know that it's going to be accepted? Right. And so this is a real conversation we're having right now.
Yeah, it really is. I just want to, since it's Pride Month, I always think about Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, and how he was covering, it was known he's LGBTQ plus forever, but he was covering, meaning not talking about it, right? Just omitting it. And I think, Nika, we do this because we sense it's not safe, but it's subtle. I don't know if it's as stark as the closet, but it's a subtle way of not talking about it, omitting it. And then finally, his employees, by the way, everybody said, it is a glaring omission. Your silence makes it feel like it's something you're ashamed of. And we need your support because you are the CEO of this worldwide brand. So subsequently, you can read about this. He wrote a whole letter. He said, I'm a private person. I didn't want to do this. He would have taken that to his grave professionally. And yet
Yeah.
I want you all to, yes, it's uncomfortable. And there's some questions about privacy in the chat, actually, Nika, around like, where does professional identity begin and end with personal privacy? Yes, totally.
Yeah.
However, when you sign up to lead, their leadership is hard because it should be. It is hard. It is
Absolutely.
uncomfortable. He did not want to do that,
Absolutely.
but he did it because he knew it wasn't about his discomfort. It actually was about shining a light for a population that desperately needs to know that I can be the next Tim Cook. I can do that. So transparency was super uncomfortable for him. And it was so moving to read that he actually realized it was much bigger than him and his own comfort. So
Right. That is a great display of leadership. And to
Yeah.
your point about the chatter that's happening in the chat right now, you know, a lot of times we do cover our mask or don't, or just avoid it because we are protecting ourselves, you know, and I don't want to place judgment when people are in that position, because we each know the emotional capacity that we have to give, right, to any given time and situation in any environment. So I do think it's important for people to be so self-aware and reflective about that, and they govern themselves accordingly about those decisions. But where I think there is a greater opportunity, to your point of the story that you shared, is when leaders are also able to be so vulnerable. And it goes back to also the psychological safety aspect of those environments in an organization. You know, I think that when organizations are very forthcoming about allowing opportunities for people to be forthright and to share what support looks like for them, then I think that is going to lend itself to people feeling more comfortable with sharing, you know, different aspects of their identity. Because if we think that what's happening outside of the four walls of the workplace is not impacting how people are showing up to the workplace, we are very misguided. You know, who we are as people, we don't place those elements of our identity on the mantle and leave it there before we walk out the door to go to work. It's with us the whole entire time. And so I think certainly it would serve organizations best if they found ways and strategies to allow people to be very open about those identity you know, aspects that will really help people to support them in a better way.
Yeah. And you know, Nika, in the chat, I'm reading, it's interesting. Sometimes you downplay something like a PhD, multiple degrees. Someone says they were neurodiverse and shared that and was told it's not welcome here, kicked out of school. I mean, I encourage you all to read the chat, but there's so much work that needs to be done. And I love about the iceberg that we have an expanding conversation about diversity dimensions. I really think that's the future. We have to be able to hold like the classic categories that we have been tracking for years of race and gender and others, right? And sexual orientation and abilities. But there's literally so much more going on that every time I do this poll, I'm always reminded having a more holistic conversation about all the things that are coming with stigma and people's fears is so important. And by the way, this is a very important way to include people that have felt outside of this discussion for so long, is to describe it in this way, in this, like, open the aperture and say, you know something about this, and I know you do. And so that's been my effort as a teacher, is to continue to kind of pry that open and keep it open, because I really am so committed to moving forward together and more completely, versus just some of us knowing a lot about this topic and pushing that boulder and leaving others confusedly behind and bewildered or feeling that they don't matter. And so anyway, I hope this is helpful, everybody. Can I move on to the next poll, is to ask you to elaborate on why you answered what you did, and to tell us, you know, how did it land for you to have to cover in this way? What is the impact? And I always love doing this, Nika, with such a big audience. I'm actually really excited to see this. So why did you answer what you did? And can you elaborate? What was that, you know, why? And what was the cost or the penalty or the impact on you? And you could say exhaustion, frustration, literally quitting. So when people are transparent and there's a penalty, Nika, what do you counsel people on? when they share that. I want to be my full self. I'm committed. But I'm working in this workplace where either my manager or my leadership or my company, if I leap, the net will definitely not appear. What do you recommend?
That is such a great question. And first and foremost, before I recommend anything, I just like to take a moment to try to stand in solidarity with that person. I want them to know that they are validated, that they are important, that they are accepted, and that whatever circumstances they were met with when sharing information about themselves that caused them to not feel certainty about being able to, continue to thrive in that environment, that it's not something that has anything to do with them. It's more about the other person, right? I think that first and foremost is really important to show that support. But then the other thing is that I think people have to know that they are not powerless, right? I get it that there are circumstances that will drive and inform how someone may make a decision, the timing in which they may make a decision, of how in which they may react to different circumstances that could be harming them from a workplace perspective. But I also think that it starts with the mindset of knowing that you aren't completely powerless, right? And if we consider that sometimes we don't even know that we are creating harm for people, but our intentions are pure. And so if we have the language to be able to share that this is harmful to me, this is what that response, how it made me feel, I'm not feeling very supported. If we can have the language to be equipped to have that conversation in a very productive and effective way, I do believe that it has the ability to move the needle in some circumstances, right? And so I'm big on providing support by not only validating the person's feelings and that they are fully accepted and whole who they are, but equally important, helping them to have the language to be able to advocate for themselves and to express what's coming up for them. I think sometimes we feel like dissent has to always be conflictual in a way that's bad and unhealthy. And I think that we have to also break out of that mindset. Healthy conflict is also good conflict, and it can be really useful.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. Somebody in the questions is saying humility and grace and space.
Yeah.
Like, that we differentiate between calling in and calling out. And I love the call in because it's that moment of being able to say, here was the impact on me or on others. If you're a really practiced ally, there are moments when you can actually intervene or not speak for someone. Absolutely, because you should always calibrate with someone who's been harmed first. But if you are in a space where there is no one to advocate for themselves, there is so much you can give feedback on, but the way you do it really matters. That is brave transparency, right? But there's an art to it. We can't see the actual polling question answers, everybody, yet on screen, although I know we have almost 100 answers. So I wonder, Nika, can you see that? I can't see.
No, I cannot, but I will tell you, it looks like it's already timed out. At least that's what I'm seeing in the chat. That's it timed out. So I don't know if many people had the opportunity, especially since this was kind of an open-ended short answer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to highlight something quickly, maybe while we're figuring out and people are still percolating on this question. When you were talking about diversity earlier, I'm so glad that you brought to the fore the importance of amplifying full breadth and reach of all dimensions of diversity, because I do think that that is a way for us to help get everyone to feel very much a part of this work, where I think a lot of folks have felt alienated. It's not just about the optics of age, race, and gender. And so the iceberg is always a great resource to bring to a conversation like this.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Looks like some are coming up now. Are you able to see them? I'm seeing some of them. Okay.
I am. Do you want to, normally when I see, it's interesting to do this in Zoom, but yeah, if everybody on the back end would just kind of slowly scroll through some of these, and maybe Nika and I can respond to a couple as we see them. Let's see.
So far, socioeconomic and then age has been mentioned as, one of the reasons. And, and we see age on both ends. There are a lot of people that are young professionals in the workplace, and they often feel like they are not valued for their perspective because they're inexperienced. And then there's also a lot of people that are boomers, and perhaps they're like, people feel like I'm no longer relevant because maybe I don't know all the great technology, and maybe because, they feel like I'm on the brink of retirement and one foot out the door. So yes, there's definitely both ands, and there's opportunity to hold the middle as we're finding some common ground and really being able to understand perspectives from different angles.
That's right. That's absolutely right. There's one
Yeah.
here about being the only female in a warehouse environment. That can be extremely difficult, and an incentive to cover, right? And to mask, Nika, to that word you've used, which is so powerful. I know some people aren't familiar with, aren't comfortable with my faith, so I don't talk about that, which is sad to me, because I've had Christian leaders come up to me after my talks and say, I'm afraid to talk about my faith, and I love you as an LGBTQ person. Like, we are this kind of congregation, and I desperately personally want to know about that person and who they are, because it's, to me, that's beautiful and healing and important.
It is. Yeah. That one resonates with me as well. As a woman of faith and of Christian belief, I'm also a DEI practitioner. I know how to hold space for the fact that there's many different faith-based religions, and some that are not, so they don't have beliefs at all. But it does not negate, how important the value that I place on my, religion. And so I think that we have to be able to hold space for people to show up the way that makes them feel like they can do so at their best.
That's right. That's
Oh,
right.
family and caregiver.
Oh,
Now
yeah.
that's really interesting too. I am starting to experience the results of having aging parents right now in my life. And so thinking about that can be really, really scary. And I think that having community just to understand how others are navigating that can be really important. Yeah.
Yeah. I see some
Stuff here.
I don't have the same credentials as others, so I don't talk about that. I'm an outsider. There's so many things. Nika, I've been thinking a lot about socioeconomic background and not sort of entering systems where you may be the first in your family to have ever worked in that environment. How, and the sort of unspoken norms, and also the assumptions about the means that you may have to participate. It's sort of like you're learning a new language, and you didn't really get mentored on that in your family, and there's so much pride in you in the family, but there's so little. I mean, that's a very difficult thing to lower the waterline about, is when you really grew up so differently from your peers. It's and yet to sensitize those peers to their own biases in terms of things they take for granted. So it's this like double-edged sword, because it's risky to disclose, but it is also a teachable moment, as we hope anybody who has a people leadership responsibility must have their biases pointed out. They can't let these things stand. And yet, we know diversity training is sort of relatively effective, not effective, it depends, but that's training. I mean, a personal relationship with somebody has been shown to really change hearts and minds the most. And that's how gay marriage got passed, is honestly, so many people had a gay friend. Now so many people have a non-binary or trans friend, and usually that's actually people's kids. So we're now seeing the sea change. Given it's Pride Month, I'm really so mindful of how many parents and kids are navigating this right now and learning about each other and going through this process that we've been teaching about forever in the workplace. But it's now coming like very true for people, like right where they live, literally, and who they love in their family unit. And it's what an opportunity for that parent, that adult, that leader to come into the workplace and lead differently because of that deep empathy that's been, and I hope empathy that's been developed through the struggle of navigating that on behalf of your kid, with your kid, alongside. But that's fascinating. I mean, like 25% of Gen Z, 25% of Gen Z is not heterosexual and not cisgender. So
Mhm.
it's startling to realize that we are literally, and when we don't share our pronouns, when we don't know anything about this, when we stand up there and use the old school terminology that we do, we're just losing an opportunity to win the trust of someone, and we're unprepared. So
So
you know,
true. It
yeah.
reminds me of how personal this work is, right? And how it impacts us at the human level. And then that often is what sparks some type of action or allyship, or, wanting to further someone else's education, to help them to become more aware, as you were talking about parents who may have kids that are a part of the LGBTQ community and how they navigate the complexities of that. I think that it really does sometimes require us to get as proximate as possible through to those experiences by hearing people share firsthand, how they have been navigating those circumstances. And it is personal, and it goes back to, I think, this whole notion of storytelling. It has a way of helping us to really deepen our empathy, our care and concern for others. It helps us to be moved to action, right? It's hard for us to hear stories and hear how it's impacting someone, especially if it's in a negative way, and not feel something, feel with that person and want to be of support. And so so much of this is personal, and I don't want that to be missed, because I think it goes back also to the broad conversation of how do we get back to this conversation really being centered at the core on humanity. And that's something that all of us can really align with, and should be gravitating to as part of this discussion.
Yeah, there was a beautiful question from an anonymous person, Nika, about I am multiple things, and I'm out about certain things and not about others. So it's Pride Month, and this person is out about being gay and not out about being trans. And we are all on a journey of disclosure and courage. And I wonder if we could show the last slide, team, that we have, which is the continuum of change. Nika, I know you and I are always aligned because we believe change is a process. We believe, that we need to give ourselves grace as we're pivoting through this and challenging ourselves towards, hopefully, more alignment, the most alignment that we could hope for. But some around us we're not even ready, and we're still discovering things under the waterline. And then others are on this journey from, unaware phase 1, which is denial, like you were talking about earlier, denial, pushback, resistance. I think even unaware can be like, I'm a good person, but I'm not investigating my impact. I think that can be unaware too. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And then from unaware to aware, we wake up, we sort of get consciously incompetent, meaning I'm conscious of my incompetence, and I'm learning, reading, listening, developing, deepening my understanding of my own story and my iceberg, but also that of others that I don't. You just talked about proximity to difference. We're living in these bubbles, and they've been created, unfortunately, by technology, has been reinforcing the echo chamber of and media continues to feed that. And it's hard sometimes to know what is true. So in aware, we investigate that. And then in active, we begin to get into the arena. And this is where I think a lot of people, Anika, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts, they are trying to lead, speak up, say the harder thing, ask for different conversations, be open about their own diversity dimensions, perhaps those that are stigmatized that they've never shared. And this is a tough place to be, because you don't have the competency, you're not polished, you don't know how it's going to go. You may unintentionally step in it and have to kind of have that growth mindset of failing forward that we always talk about. So there's a lot of, in this third one, there's a lot of humanity and grace and the call in for ourselves. And then also as others learn, making space for them to learn, because we can't learn without doing, and we also can't learn without support. But when we make it like such a perfectionistic, negative, sort of you're the part of the problem language, it's anybody that reaches this point is going to give up and say, this is not worth it. It's too scary. The penalty is too high. I may as well just go dark and go quiet. And they take their
Yeah.
marbles and they go home. Then
Yeah.
we lose out on someone that could be a real advocate.
Yeah, those marbles could have been diamonds, and yeah,
Oh,
but we
I
won't
love
get to
that.
see it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's it's part of why I brought up earlier the challenge with council culture. I believe in holding people accountable, but I also believe that we need all of us to arrive to this place of common unity around the importance of equity, equality, and opportunity for all. And I think that this whole notion of calling forward people to a place of embracing that is so important, and we have to be intentional about it. We were talking about a moment ago how the awareness factors that some people believe this not really an issue, right? Everybody in my workplace get along, so there's no need for us to have some very intentional efforts around DEIB. Well, that's not enough. I think that the passivity that maybe we have held on to for so long hasn't served us well. We have to be very intentional, and it requires us to really think about how people are being impacted, even if it's not something that's been a part of our experience. And so yeah, I totally agree. I think that we often feel isolated when we are othered, and often we are othered because it's just not our experience. And so we put people in a separate category, and we're not meant to be isolated. Just as society, we are meant to be in community with others. And so for those of us who are really looking to show forth support to individuals who are finding it hard to navigate some of their identity aspects within different spaces, the best thing we can do is show up as allies, and and to really try to stand in solidarity with them in a way where the action is aligned with results that matter, not because of what we think matters, but because of what those communities and those individuals have communicated matter. So yeah, all that's really important.
Beautifully said. That's really beautiful. Gosh, we love the input, everybody.
Yes.
I mean, there's just so many. There's like
Chat's
many
blowing up.
dialogues going on. I've seen a couple things, Nika, here around like, why does it matter for me to be out about my sexual orientation, my life, who I love? Like, should it matter? And it's an interesting question. Generationally, by the way, I don't know if a Gen Zer would probably say that. I don't know. I could be wrong.
Maybe.
It sounds a lot more like our generation. I think we just grew up at a time when it was not appropriate, and we have a deep belief that it's not professional, and we have a deep belief that personal and professional should not overlap.
Yeah.
And we may be deeply uncomfortable with the conversation.
Yeah.
So I think all those things combine to make us want to just say, can't we just leave it at the door? And you made a point earlier about that it's just no longer possible. Technology has meant that it's no longer possible, but kids have grown up in a very different world where they were way more open and educated about all of who they are. And for us to then have them enter a workplace where there's then all of a sudden this confusion about what's okay, when throughout kind of school and, frankly, the internet is an access to the global identity. Yeah. So you've got young people who, and bless them. Like, I mean, if I had been able to feel that, I wanted that. That's what I've fought 30 years to feel. Yeah. So I don't want to squelch it. I think it's an important message from the future. But different generations are going to struggle with this level of transparency because of those stereotypes that we had that were embedded in us. And because we've been penalized ourselves. And I think it's really easy to turn around and say, well, I didn't have that. You don't deserve that. I didn't get to do that. I didn't have that life. I didn't have that right. And that can come from this place of anger that makes a whole lot of sense. But at the same time, I'm not sure. I don't know where that goes. I don't know what to do with that because it's not forward. There's not forward momentum in that conversation. It's more sort of a hunkering down energy of, I'm going to defend what I'm comfortable with, and I expect others around me to do the same. And remember, you're only a leader if you are given that title by others. This is not,
Yes,
you don't just get to decide in a vacuum kind of leader you're going
right,
to be.
exactly.
It is in the
And when,
estimation of others. So I would say if
yeah,
you believe that way, then how are others going to feel around you? If you can pull it off and have your values and believe whatever values you might have, leadership, leading a multicultural workplace is a skill. And
yeah,
and if your values misalign with it, then perhaps you can kind of pull off that amazing trick of leading in one way and believing something else. I think it's possible because leadership is a
yeah,
job. It's what you do.
yeah,
You can believe what you want to believe. But again, like sort of back to what if you work for an institution that has stated commitments,
yeah,
then part of your job is to lead across difference and do that well, and get the most from people. So it's sort of like, it's this interesting question, Nika, of like, well, what do I do about my values? Whether those are like religious beliefs or annoyance at Pride or anger that I'm having to look at the flag every day during June, or I don't want to know about these affinity groups because they're just, all they are is complaining. And we can look at it that way,
yeah.
but it misses this really like just invaluable, essential education about the way the world is
Right.
changing and the way that leadership is going to need to look in a multicultural world.
Yeah, I think we also have to just, remind ourselves that everything that shows up in this evolving world is not necessarily for everyone, and that's okay too. So like if you're in a workplace and maybe the ERGs, the BRGs are being introduced and you're like, well, I don't care anything about that, or maybe some new policies are being introduced, you're like, well, that has nothing to do with me, then I think that, this just the acknowledgement that, but it has something to do with a lot of other people that are part of, again, this environment. And that should be enough in and of itself. And I think that when people are holding close to the chest a lot of information that, is about their identity, then I understand the reasons why. But what it does do is it prevents, I think, a lot of organizations from being even more intentional in the first place about trying to shift with the times. I think about the transgender community. A lot of organizations have had to scramble when someone was brave enough to say, I'm going through a transition right now, right? And I need support from my organization. I don't know about you, but I've had times where folks have called and said, well, how do we navigate this? What do we do? And they're scrambling at the last moment.
Oh, yeah.
But again, if it's something that's not an afterthought because it's just us paying attention to what's happening in the world and how things are evolving and things are changing and being proactive to align with that, I think that it serves our organizations and the people in our organizations best. So yeah, it takes some
agreed.
courage, but there's great value to a broader population of people when we do so, when we do choose courage over comfort, which is language that I know you use often and I love it.
That's beautiful. Courage over comfort. Thank you. And that really resonated with people when you say not everything is for everyone.
Yes.
But leadership, if you do have a leadership job, I would recommend it is a skill. And maybe we can take the heat
Yes.
out of it by saying it's a skill among other skills that is really essential. So what we
Yes.
believe about it, the values that we imbue with it, all of that, it doesn't necessarily need to accompany it to be a
Yes.
good leader, to be an inclusive leader. So
Yeah,
it's
I
kind of
often say acceptance doesn't necessarily mean agreement. And we can accept without necessarily agreeing that that may be the truth for our personal lives, because it could go against maybe our values or who we are, and that's okay. But it does not have to become now this conflict to where we're designating, certain attributes of people's identities as good, bad, right, or wrong, right? And I think that's the difference. We need to stop classifying difference as good, right, bad or wrong, and just seeing it for what it is, just a point of respect in which things differ and people differ. I'm noticing the time, Jennifer, and I feel like we may need to shift to bring Saray back
I would love
on
that.
so that she can help us with some of the Q&A that's been showing up. So Saray, would you like to join us?
Yes, thank you. What a phenomenal discussion. My goodness. Thank you so much. And the chat has been moving so fast.
It's hard to keep up.
Yes, we're all learning in previous generations. Do you think in the past they were ashamed or were trying to hide their true identities, or do you feel it is something else?
Hmm. Well, Nika, I will say
Yes.
I think humanity has probably always had a variety of identities. We didn't have the names for it. We had a lot of painful sort of a lack of a life, I would say, for people and who are living lives that were not happy for them. And I think so right now it feels like we're finally shedding light on so much. And that's why I kind of protect it so much, because I know how many lives have been broken, how many lives have been lost because of the act of living a life that's not yours. So to me, it is a beautiful thing to see the investigation of gender identity, for example. And I do believe those numbers have probably always been with us, but that there was no conversation, no frameworks, no understanding, no support, and no conversation. I say to organizations all the time, build it and they will come. In fact, I have an organization right now who doesn't have an LGBTQ group, but has a lot of the other affinity groups. And a bunch of allies called me and said, would you please come and help us begin to normalize this, because they're here, but they're afraid. And this is very still much a part of people's lives. And anyway, so the fear is still with us, and the fear of violence, the reality of violence, particularly for some of us in the LGBTQ community that identify in certain ways. So, but educate yourself about, how identity is a continuum. We are all on a gender continuum, and we are all on a sexual orientation continuum. And we're at different, like Christmas lights, we're at like different parts in the strand. And not a lot of us are truly binary in every way, and that is, what a neat way to give names to those different places, that people, to be specific about it. I can't tell you, your name is the most precious thing to hear for a human, is your name. It's why I try to say it as often as I can to let somebody know that they're heard. Their pronouns, the way they want to be called, the naming of who they are is this deep, deep human need to belong. And so we're in this phase of naming and counting, and we still have so many that are hiding. So I know these numbers look big, but that's like the tip of the iceberg for disclosure. Same with disabilities, same with a lot of other stigmatized and often invisible identities that we do not trust that we're going to be safe if we tell the truth. So let's all kind of rally around that and say, how can I be a part of changing that? Because that is still our reality.
I couldn't agree more. It's definitely, and it really boils down to dignity and treating each other with that mutual respect. You don't necessarily have to understand, but we're all human beings, and we all have to provide that even responsibility to ourselves, and by sharing our own self-respect and treating each other in such ways. So thank you. So let's even, if that's okay, expand a little bit further. And you've addressed it in a number of different ways, but even some quick starter conversations or easy ways to address this question from Melissa. What is the best way to begin to have a dialogue with individuals who are openly anti-DEIB?
Nika.
Yeah. So my take on this is that I think when we have encountered individuals who we know have their heels dug into the sand and they are pretty firm in their position of DEI not having value, I tend to believe that we can't always just assume that we need to be that vessel to try to persuade them otherwise. I think that a relationship where there's a rapport, where there's some level of influence, that's where there's probably going to be greater propensity for that individual to be open about having the conversation and the dialogue. And sometimes it may not even be a conversation. It could be an act like if there's, let's say it's someone that's in your workplace, right? Maybe, every so often you send an article that helps to create a different perspective that maybe they haven't, considered before. I've seen that be quite effective in changing people's minds and hearts. Again, I go back to storytelling. And I also believe that we cannot undermine behavioral change. And what I mean by that is it's going to be hard for us to change hearts and minds across the board all the time. That is not something that is probably going to show forth, in our world. Around this topic. We're going to have some individuals that are not going to see it in the same lens that myself or Jennifer and so many others see it as. But if we can get those individuals to at least comply to whatever the behavior norms are, that does not create the harm within the workplace, that's a win as well, right? So I think that sometimes we place a lot of pressure on ourselves to change someone's hearts and minds. And maybe what we should be doing is thinking about who do we feel like there is a propensity for us to have that influence with, to be able to shift their mindset. I say often, when I wrote my book, I was often asked, who is your book for? And I was more equipped to answer who my book was not for. And it was not for those individuals who dug their heels in and said, I don't believe in equality and equity. I believe that there needs to be this power dynamic, and I want to continue to maintain that. That's not my audience, right? I think that those are individuals that, certainly can be reached maybe by some people. I didn't feel like necessarily it was me. I am more after those individuals who I feel like they just don't know how to engage in a really effective way. I think all of those audiences are really important. And it's also why I advocate for diversity of practitioners in this space, because we each have different ways in which we like to show up to these conversations that can yield some results and bringing others along that maybe another practitioner cannot. I'm interested in your thoughts on that, Jennifer.
Oh, I
Such a
love
good
that.
question.
Well, I know. Oh gosh, resistance. Well, you made so many good points. I think you said it all. I'm meeting people where they're at.
Yeah.
Sometimes resistance yields if, like you say, Nika, somebody gets information in a certain way or resonates with a story or has something happen on their team or is given some kind of data, if they really appreciate sort of numbers and that kind of, information is persuasive to them. Or we dedicate our energy to those who are on the path. That's another
Yes.
choice. That's another choice.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we could make that choice. I mean, I kind of think like I'm going to the burning building and trying to drag people out that don't want to be saved. So sometimes I feel drawn to that, but maybe if you can make it sort of spend your energy wisely and smartly without burning
Yes.
yourself out. And that always has to be, you got to put your oxygen mask on first
Yeah.
and decide where you're going to make the time, the emotional bandwidth, where you're going to, really make an effort to reach someone. Are they reachable? So I hate to leave anybody behind. It's just sort of a practical consideration. And the movable middle of the bell curve, right? It's a bell curve shape. That middle is the really juicy area for change. It's that like, I'm open, I don't know what to do, but I'm open, I'm curious, I'm willing to maybe try something new.
Yeah.
That is to me a working with, as opposed to maybe working against. But Nika, you and I know some people who love the hardest conversations of them all. And
Yes.
hats off to them.
Absolutely.
all
We need
kinds.
all of that. We need
Yes.
all different styles and approaches to this work, right? I say that all the time. It reminds me of how, though, when we talk about the big amplification on conscious bias, while I understood at that point in time why people were gravitating towards that as these learning experiences and the training, but what I also do not want to be missed is that there are a subset of individuals to where their bias is very conscious, right? It's not unconscious, it's very conscious. And so just for me, I do, as part of my own self-care, radical self-care, is to try to align myself where I feel like I do have the propensity and the ability to create that level of change through that influence. And so, and I think that's okay for us to evaluate for ourselves. Is this that opportunity, or do I need to let someone else in a different vessel or method to come in and try to, create that change?
Beautiful.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I know I've taken so many notes and just checkpoints away of how is it that we can empower each other and create these spaces. And I couldn't agree more. Let's really focus on the areas that we can really influence and really address those spaces. Make sure that we're sharing voices that are not often heard, and that we make room for them, and we're advocating for each other. So thank you so much. I'm so ready for the rest of the summit. If this sets the tone, I'm so excited. So thank you again. And I'm going to hand it over to Erica, who will help us wrap up the rest of this keynote. Thank you.
Hello,
Thank you,
and
Jennifer.
wow, wow, wow. Saray, I echo those sentiments. Thank you so much for a very engaging session. I truly enjoyed the discussions, particularly around the discussion on clarity needed for resistance. My favorite quote that was noted was courage over comfort. I'm excited. I'm going to be using that often, so prepare. Courage over comfort, okay? Again, if you didn't have an opportunity to meet me early on, I'm Erica Stroman. I am the creator and facilitator of the second Workplace Diversity Seminar happening later today. And so as we continue to express our appreciation for this phenomenal session, I'd also like to extend a heartfelt thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today. Your participation is what makes these events truly special. So as a reminder, our breakout morning sessions will be getting started here within the next 10 minutes, okay? So I think 10:50 Arizona time. So if you haven't done so already, please take a moment to review the session schedule and choose one of the 3 sessions that best suits your needs and your interests. So we have leadership and management, we have health and behavioral sciences, and we have education. So additionally, I encourage you to make the most of this summit by networking with your peers. That's what it's all about. Exchange LinkedIn contacts and actively participate in the connection around conversations happening throughout the event. So thank you again. I hope you enjoy the remainder of today's sessions, and welcome again. See you soon.
UOPX may be mostly online, but that doesn't mean Phoenixes are alone. Say hello to Paula Hutchinson, an entrepreneur, speaker, and president of the alumni chapter in Phoenix, Arizona. The university has an alumni network of more than 1 million graduates across the country. Paula Hutchinson is one of them. Let's see how she supports other Phoenixes in their goals. Go, Paula.
Thanks, Alex. I am proud to be a University of Phoenix alumni. My advisor had me hooked from our first conversation. She helped me through my degrees and through life changes ranging from sickness to family deaths to moving to Phoenix. Growing up, I saw how my mother and grandmother worked hard so I could have the education they didn't. I understood early on that a college degree offered a chance at a better life. As a UOPX Alumni Center chapter president, I see the same determination as so many other Phoenixes who have made their educational dreams a reality. The University of Phoenix provided a pathway to education and opportunity for me. Now that I am able to return that favor as a president of the university's alumni chapter in Phoenix, where we have over 1,000 members, it is important to me to serve as a major contributor to the alumni community, whether it's by coordinating webinars with career advice, creating network opportunities, or simply cheering on other alumni who choose to earn another degree, which is what I'm doing, by the way. I'm in the doctoral program now. At University of Phoenix, the alumni community is all about building professional and personal relationships that go the distance and defy geographical distance. We share skills, contacts, advice, and opportunities. We help each other navigate life's challenges. There is so much pride in this UOPX alumni community of professionals across the country. The university truly taught me to be a Phoenix and rise from the ashes. I have already accomplished so much as an entrepreneur and educator. Now, as I work toward completing my doctoral of education program, I look forward to champion for equitable education. That's my story. Back to you, Alex.
Thanks, Paula. What an amazing way to stay connected after graduation. Joining one of UOPX's 50 alumni chapters offers plenty of benefits, from potential professional networking to quarterly social events to growing your leadership skills. And that's not all. UOPX alumni can also join the exclusive Phoenix Link Network, which is like an amplified career directory, and take advantage of tuition discounts and networking opportunities. Talk about community support. Take care.